Culture is often described as this invisible hand that drives governance in a business.
A good risk management function really is looking at value creation and is looking at strategic. It's not looking just at compliance.
To be able to influence, one has to be trusted, and to be trusted, one has to build the relationships.
There's a lot of hype about AI. So when you approach AI, look at it through two lenses, opportunity and risk, and both have to be managed.
Internal audit is probably one of the very few functions apart from the CEO who gets to see the entirety of the organization.
The more you are who you are and you do what you really enjoy, you will find that success just comes.
What would be your message to other aspiring female talent listening to us today?
Not of the certainty, but you're really capable of doing far more than you think you are.
Welcome to Impact Legacy with Rania, the podcast where we explore inspiring stories of leadership and success and uncover the lessons that shape influence, credibility, and lasting impact. I'm Rania. Each episode, I sit down with leaders, visionaries, and change makers, from audit and risk to CEOs, entrepreneurs to senior leaders across the globe, to explore how they built trust, created value, changed perception, and forged a legacy of impact. Before we begin, please hit subscribe or follow and click the bell. If today's conversation resonates, please like, comment, and share it with your network. Your voice matters as we grow this journey together. So let's begin. Hello, I'm Rania Bejjani. I'm a global governance, risk, and internal audit leader. After a long and rewarding career as Chief Audit and Risk Executive, where I transformed risk and audit into a great success, I now advise boards and C-suite, mentor governance, risk, and audit leaders, and train teams on strategy, design, and implementation to strengthen and modernize governance, risk, and internal audit, elevate performance and perceptions, and create value and trust. I also speak at international conferences and webinars. My work focuses on guiding current and future leaders to develop the strategic mindset, tech savviness, and the critical influence and impact skills to lead with confidence and courage. Through my advisory, mentoring, and training programs, I enable organizations worldwide to build resilience, and I empower governance, risk, and internal audit to become trusted strategic business partners, delivering greater impact. I created this podcast series to spark ideas and inspire leaders, from seasoned board members to rising talent, to infuse more authenticity, heart, and joy into leadership, and to create lasting success, impact, and legacy. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Impact Legacy with me, Rania. My guest today is the REMCO Chair and Independent Non-Executive Director at Norman Broadband and the NHS Supply. She's also a Non-Executive Director at 𝗗𝗲𝗃. A former FTSE 30 Group CHRO, she has led global transformations across a number of large organizations and sectors. Her career spans Citibank, AT&T, Rolls-Royce, BSI, and she's worked in China, Singapore, the UK, and globally, including the US. She's also an AI entrepreneur. She created an AI innovation hub for people, culture, and the future of work, which she sold recently. She brings a distinctive blend of governance, AI, digital transformation, and people-centered leadership. Join me in welcoming Devyani Vaishampayan. Devyani, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rani. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. It's so great to have your perspective as a non-executive director, as a CHRO, and as a REMCO chair to really enrich this conversation here today about leadership, impact, and legacy. So, Devyani, your story is fascinating, and it shows so much curiosity, ambition, adaptability, a thirst for learning, innovation. I think it would be great if we hear more from you about your story and what drove you throughout.
Thank you, Rania. I am at the age where I look back and I think, gosh, yeah, my 18-year-old would never have imagined that I would be doing what I'm doing today. Because I grew up in India. 40 years ago, I was a teenager there, did my degree in physics, did an MBA, trained as a behavioral scientist too, started worked for Citibank, then worked for AT&T, and 10 years later, I won a scholarship to do an advanced MBA program in the UK. And that's how I moved with my family to the UK about 28 years ago. And since then, I guess I was really lucky to have worked for some excellent organizations, British Gas, Rolls-Royce, British Standards Institute, all global businesses where I was at the group exec level. So I was really overseeing human resources, culture, talent, people, but in very complex international businesses. First 30 years, spent time there, not just in the UK, but I was also very lucky to have been posted to Singapore, posted to Hong Kong, posted to the US. Of course, dragging my poor family everywhere, and they put up with it, but learned a lot during this time. And as I said, was involved in making some big decisions around M&A, around acquisitions, around divestitures, around change, transformation. But I guess that wasn't enough for me. And just when everything was going swimmingly well, I pivoted and I became an AI entrepreneur. And a lot of people were really surprised because it's not easy to give up a good title, a good salary, a very secure job to get into being an entrepreneur where you've got to start with doing everything yourself, buying stuff yourself, being very sparing about the money you spend. But I did it because for two reasons. One is, of course, the world of AI fascinated me, and I knew it's going to make a dramatic impact on how business works, on how workforces work. But equally, I wanted to test myself around being an entrepreneur too. And so the 8 year journey of being an entrepreneur involved two things. I raised an angel investment fund, and I also set up an AI innovation hub around the future of work. And last year, completed a successful exit of my business. So I guess my second phase of my career as an entrepreneur was came to an end, and that was planned. And now I'm in the third phase of my career, which is really being a portfolio non-exec director. So I'm currently on three boards, all three very different businesses. 𝗶𝗶, which is one of the global top 10 accounting and tax advisory firms, Paris-based. I'm on the board of Norman Broadbent, which is a global search and executive business, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange. And I'm on the board of Supply Chain Coordination Limited, which does the entire logistics and procurement for the NHS. It's a private business. And in addition to that, I do two other things. I'm a board mentor with an organization called Critical Eye. So I mentor CEOs and senior execs. And I've also been made fellow by Cambridge University's Chapter Zero, which focuses on climate for board directors.
It is really inspiring. Tell us, what has driven you to do all these multifaceted chapters in your career, and what did you enjoy the most?
Thanks, Rania. I mean, I have been lucky to have done a lot of different things. And there's, really no one thing that has prompted that. But I think it's a combination of, as an individual, I like to challenge myself. I like to learn, and which is why I've taken so many different routes constantly. I've also been very lucky to have been born in a family where I was encouraged to learn, to educate myself, and then after getting married, to have a very supportive husband and family to help me around this. And last but not the least, I think I've just been lucky. Life has given me opportunities, but I've also jumped and taken those. So it's a combination of all three.
Okay, that's amazing. I appreciate how humble you are about all this, but I do see a lot of ambition and perseverance and thirst for learning in all of this, which is amazing. And which part did you enjoy the best?
I think I've enjoyed every bit. My corporate career over 30 years was great. I got to travel a lot. I got to work on large, complex business issues. Then an entrepreneur phase was really different because I had to be entirely on my own, create things on my own, but AI was also an area where not just me, the world really didn't know much about. So creating something with so much of ambiguity was what I enjoyed during my AI phase. And now, as a board director, what I really enjoy is the strategic influence that I can have on an organization, helping them to see long term, but also helping execs step out of the day to day and look at things in a different way.
Let's talk about AI. Let's talk a little bit about AI. So you've been an early adopter, an early innovator, and created your own AI hub. What did this experience really teach you, and what would be your message to anyone listening to us about embracing AI?
So I think my whole experience of 8 years of creating an AI business, but also working with business leaders to help them adopt AI, I think what it showed me is, on one hand, there's a lot of hype about AI, but actually it's very different to regular technology. So when you approach AI, look at it through two lenses, opportunity and risk, and both have to be managed. You can't just focus on the opportunity, you can't just focus on the risk. So I think if you're in business, learn to balance both. But the second biggest thing about AI is the way to approach it is test something, learn from it, and then move on. This is not like traditional technology where you plan a 2-year project, the rollout for 2 years. No, you don't have the certainty around it. But equally, AI is changing so much that you have to have a very agile mindset to adopt it. And last but not the least, a huge part of AI is also the culture and the people bit. So don't ignore that, because just by itself, it's not going to give you the returns you want.
Okay. And how ready do you think boards are to understand and oversee AI?
If you ask me frankly, not at all, or very little. Because I guess the biggest issue is most board members are of a certain age, and their exec career has been at a time when AI didn't exist at all. So this is a completely new area for them. And you may read about it, you may attend workshops, but it's very different to actually having worked with AI and being able to understand what it can do or not do. So I do think a lot of board members feel quite diffident when it comes to AI. And we are now at a tipping point. AI is no longer the new shiny bit that you can keep an innovation team working on while the rest of the business goes ahead. AI is getting very integrated, and boards have to play a far, far bigger role in understanding strategically the impact that AI and the opportunity that AI can have on businesses. So to answer your question, I don't think most boards are really not equipped for AI in the way they are around the other aspects of skill sets that boards have.
That's a concern in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a concern because whether it's figuring out what's the level of investment, whether it's figuring out how do you hold business teams accountable, whether it's figuring out what are the risks, reputation otherwise, there's a whole range of things that boards may not think of immediately and may need support on, unlike, let's say, audit, risk, REMCO, areas which they're far more familiar with.
Right. Well, talking of audit and risk, how much do they talk about audit and risk across the board, boards? So, of course, there is the Audit and Risk Committee that is their job, is to go deep into audit and risk topics and priorities and changes. But what about the board in itself? How much time is dedicated to discussing risks?
Well, firstly, I would say the audit and risk function is probably one of the most mature areas within the board, because for a lot of boards have started with the concept of governance as one of the key things they're accountable for.
Sure.
Having said that, I think a lot depends on the size and the type of organization. So on one of my boards, which is a relatively smaller business, all the NEDs are part of the Audit and Risk Committee, because it is something that we can all put our hands around. On the SCCL board, and SCCL supply chain has an £8 billion turnover. We have 3 different committees. We have an audit and risk. We have 4 committees actually: audit and risk, performance, change committee, and REMCO. And to a certain extent, the risk bit gets carried or gets reviewed across all these four committees, but the Audit and Risk Committee has then the job of making sure everything is put together. So it's a very different structure to my other board. So a lot depends on the kind of business you're in, the size of the business, and also the speed of change, because the more change is happening, the more the audit and risk function becomes a very live entity rather than a compliance entity.
You are on 3 boards. You've had a rich executive committee. As with your executive hat on and with your board member hat on, what does the board want from an internal audit function, a risk management function, or a compliance function? Beyond what's the obvious. Beyond yes, as what these guys should be doing. What's between the lines?
So if you look at, what are the 3 key areas a board member is responsible for? It's strategy, it's governance, and it's operational oversight. And the governance piece is something that fully rests with internal audit, because that's where they are, they are independent. They are looking at risk management through a number of lenses, not just financial risk management, but also they identify other major risks. They are looking at cyber, and those are big issues for boards. So I think from a governance perspective and a risk management perspective, the internal audit function can really, or profession can play a huge role in helping boards feel comfortable, feel that they are on top of things, and not being just dependent on the exec team. And let me share a small story with you. One of my early boards, because I've learned this the hard way, by the way, is that, how important internal audit is. So one of the earlier boards that I joined, it was an AIM-listed business. Okay? So you would think the governance was fairly strong. Mm-hmm. It was listed 3 years on AIM, was growing very fast. And yet, a couple of months after I joined the board, we had to fire the CFO because the figures were all fudged. And this was a big shock, because we even had a Big Four auditor on the board. So you would expect to see a certain level of comfort that a listed company auditor on the board, and yet things didn't go well because there was the business was not big enough to have a very established internal audit function. And eventually the business went into administration. Now this is a bit of a horror story, but I think for most boards, a good internal audit function not just gives them security, it gives them the confidence. Mm-hmm. But it also prevents, a number of other risks like fraud, reputational risk, which is really important. And last but not the least, it can also help them with stakeholder management. So on one of the boards I sit, the Financial Regulatory Council is a key stakeholder. And they, as NEDs, they independently talk to us about what's happening in the business. And if we didn't have an internal audit function we trusted, we could be really losing face with the FRC.
Sure. What about beyond the sort of the fraud prevention, compliance management, regulator management? What value creation do you expect from a risk management team and or an internal audit team?
I think, to be honest, I think a good risk management function really is looking at value creation and is looking at strategic. It's not looking just at compliance. And what do I mean by that? I think the first is really what's the strategy. And when I talk about that, a good audit and risk management team will really understand the business, the external environment, the competitors, and what is making the business work or not work. So a good understanding of that means they're not just reporting things, but they're also able to understand the business impact of something. And from a board perspective, I think that's what we are looking for. We're not just looking for a list of things where compliance has happened, but a list of risks where big, small, what is the prioritization? What should the board really be focused on? That's the kind of advice we're looking for the internal audit team.
And Devyani, as the board, you guys set the tone at the top. The board is responsible for that. And culture is often described as this invisible hand that drives governance in a business. So from your experience and from both as an executive and as a board member across different industries and geographical footprints and type of organizations, from public to private to listed. How can boards meaningfully assess and influence the culture of a culture of governance within the business, within an organization, especially now that there's so much change and uncertainty and disruption?
So the good thing about what's happening right now with boards and expectations from the board is culture is definitely a big part of what is expected from the board.
Yes.
Whether it is a good understanding of culture, whether it is understanding any risks that may happen, but also actively trying to do things which can help the organization shape the culture the way they want. And it doesn't matter whether you're listed or private. The three boards that I'm on, each one of them, culture is a very important subject area and the organization takes it seriously. But what can the board do around this? So I think talking about your question about how do you create a governance culture, the key is values. What are the values of the organization? Are they real? Do employees understand that? And is that getting translated in how they do things? And more importantly, do your talent systems then reflect those values? So the way you do performance, assess performance, the way you do promotions, the way you do succession planning, is that really linked to behaviors, or is it just linked to what people deliver in terms of objectives and actual just work-related KPIs?
Mm-hmm.
So I think making sure that behavior and values is a big part of any performance, whether it's a leader, whether it's an employee, is really the way the board can push and make sure that there's consistency of culture. And then, of course, just as you measure other risks, you have to put these mechanisms to measure this. You can't just leave it for the organization, and if they tell you it's fine, you can't just assume it's fine. You need concrete objective measures. You need other touch points. You need to go and have a touch and feel what's happening within the business yourself.
Like
a number
what?
Of different things.
Like what, for example?
Well, as a board, for example, obviously you look at metrics. You join together a number of metrics: people joining, leaving, engagement. All those create a picture. But you also look at your internal talent pool, who's getting promoted, what is it based on? And you also, through that, you get a lens of what is being valued within the business. The third is attending, town halls, attending leadership events. There again, so as board members, we do that in all three businesses. And that gives you the feel of what's actually happening on the ground. So a full 360 view is really important, and board members have to commit to that. They have to commit to that.
Now tell me, as a REMCO chair and a REMCO member in three different boards, and also as CHRO in the past, because you've had that experience, obviously you sat on many REMCOs, are you linking executive incentives to risk management?
I would say not directly. In the sense that there would be, it really depends on roles. And so obviously for the CEO, CFO, it would be a big part of their role. For some of the other exec members, it may not. But ultimately, I think the scorecard is important. And typically in many organizations, it's still true that the scorecard includes your financials, it includes customer, it includes people, and it could be then, a few big projects such as technology transformation. And a good audit and risk approach, make sure that your risks that you have are identified in all these, and they get translated into the performance metrics that is expected out of the executives. So I would say there's definitely an indirect link. It's not a direct link.
When we look at the various corporate issues we've seen in let's say in the UK and globally, where either management override of controls that have led to the failure of the business, and we can list, without naming any companies, we can list quite a few here, or like the recent cyber attacks that frankly have crippled a number of large businesses in the UK. Or even, the recent issue with the unions and all that. Do you think there is value in linking executive performance to a more tangible metric around the sound and effective management of risks. So this is not about hampering taking risks, but about instilling a culture of accountability for risk management.
I think it's not as if it's not happening, Rania. So, you spoke about people, unions, etc. Now, for a good CHRO, the metrics of success would be attrition levels, whistleblowing. It would be employee engagement and management, and through that, the risk gets managed. So I don't think it's a case of we now need to put in another set of parameters. I think what you need to do is, in a way, make the linkage between the risk and what you're measuring as KPIs and what gets counted towards, therefore, bonus and LTIPs. The three need to be linked together. And at times, what is not very clear is there a linkage? The KPIs are there because traditionally they've been there, risks have moved on, and they're not really connected then.
I get you. So as a CHRO yourself and a number of companies, Devyani, and you've led also many different transformations yourselves, what would you say for all our audience listening to you today are the attributes or characteristics that make leaders stand out and have real impact and create a lasting legacy?
Yeah, so I do think this is an area where things have changed a lot, because gone are the days where the leader had to be a strong person who had all the answers, and it was a bit of a charisma effect that was really important to be a good leader. I think today's leaders, and I can see that on the three organizations I'm part of, but I also mentor a lot of CEOs. I think a few traits that are now quite different is, the first is humility. Everything is changing so fast. No one person has the answer to anything. And a good leader knows that. And there's a good awareness of what they're good at, but also what they're not good at. But they make sure they're surrounded by a good team who can step in, and together they can come up with answers.
Right.
So this whole trait of teamwork and humility is really very important.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, therefore, the ability to be empathetic. It's no longer a command and control style that works, but equally, a big part of leadership is how do you engage people, not just your own team, but the wider organization. And for that, the more authentic you are, the more empathetic you are, that's actually going to make you a good leader. It's not seen today as being weak or vulnerable, but it's actually seen as being a good leader. And the third important trait, according to me, is learnability. You have to have the attitude that you need to learn constantly. It's not about, oh, I know everything and now I'm going to tell everyone what to do. So learning new things, and technology is a big, big part of that. Mm-hmm. And as part of the learning, the ability to try and risk and do something, fail, but learn fast is getting really important.
Okay. I love that, actually. You mentioned that you train CEOs, you mentor CEOs. I mentor leaders in audit and risk, and I've been a chief audit and risk executive in 3 times in 3 different organizations, and these characteristics resonate so much with me, and I think are really, really important and for real impact. Well, actually, we have a tradition in my podcast. You get to ask me a question before we wrap up with some more areas to explore with you. Is there anything you'd like to ask me, Devyani?
Yeah, so I was curious, actually. I've mentioned a few things, but you, since you work and you coach and mentor internal auditors, what do you see as skills or traits that are important for internal auditors to be successful today?
Yeah, sure. And that's not only relevant to internal auditors, that would be relevant also for governance and risk professionals, and frankly, even broader to any service function, be it IT, be it HR. But let's focus on the governance, risk, and audit angle. Well, I would echo the three things you said. Humility is very important. The people aspect is very important. And the learnability is very important. But in our context of audit and risk, really, there is a need to reframe the vision for what those functions deliver, and to move away from the old enforcer mentality to an enabler mentality, away from a policing viewpoint to a partnering viewpoint, and really elevate the conversation with the business. There's also a real need to go beyond the transactional, which now AI and things like that can help with, and I mean data analytics or whatever in the past I've helped with, to step into the more strategic conversations with the business, align with the strategy, focus on the big strategic initiatives, and people. At the end of the day, to be an impactful leader in the governance audit in space, that means one has to be able to influence, and to be able to influence, one has to be trusted, and to be trusted, one has to build the relationships. So it's all about the human skills and, empathy, as you mentioned yourself, but also the collaboration, having the leading with courage, believing in oneself and having the confidence to take those steps, and building those empowered, inspired teams that will think critically and act and deliver this collaboration and this strategic insight. And it is, as we move now with the age of AI, whatever, embracing the new technologies and is essential, and making that shift in behavior to think about no longer just looking at what has happened and providing the hindsight of what happened, but really moving towards providing an insight now and a strategic foresight as to what all these findings and trends are showing us that could shape and help and create value to the organization. So really, it is about a change of a perspective into partnership and becoming that strategic business partner that I've been championing for the last 18, 19, 20 years, and I've achieved myself, and I coach and teach people to do. And then really about fully embracing the change and leading with the, despite the uncertainty, by taking on board the new technologies and harnessing the people skills, the collaboration skills. And an important aspect today also, I think, for anyone listening to us in that space is in the past, there's been a lot of division where people talk about compliance, risk management, audit. But as we face the future, a lot more integration between these are needed to create real resilience for the business. So talking about AI and, and the future and leadership, what would you say today, particularly that you said one of the hindrance for a board's understanding AI is probably the generational aspect. So what is the willingness of boards to actually include the youth element in there? And if you were to give our listeners, what would be three pieces of advice for an internal audit leader or a governance leader to step into a board role?
Right. So to answer your first question, clearly the AI technology piece, I think a lot of boards are looking at some innovative ways, because adding more and more board members often is not feasible, but you could create a small advisory board that can help you on this. Mm-hmm. You can bring in somebody you're mentoring from within the exec team, who has a technology background, to then sit on some of the subject matters. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of look at a couple of different things to bring that skill set in. But I think the second question is really interesting, because audit and risk professionals moving into the board space, mm-hmm. on one hand, could be a very natural transition, but I think it still doesn't happen enough that often. And I think a few things that audit and risk professionals can do if they want to embrace a board career later on is It's really important that you get a more rounded business focus and experience. Now, that could be either you do a project outside of your function, or you step into a role, but something that exposes you more to operations, to the customer, to managing teams, to managing a small P&L. All that would be really important, because business acumen and a good understanding of strategic business value is very important, which at times you may not get if you just stay confined within the internal audit space then. So moving and expanding a skill set and business skill set would be really important.
So you're saying that they take different roles within the organization. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to challenge one thing, because I'm very passionate about internal audit, and I advocate for the profession. But humbly speaking, internal audit is probably one of the very few functions, apart from the CEO, who gets to see the entirety of the organization, because it's a project everywhere in the organization. So they do have an understanding of what goes on in the business. Now they may not, all of them may be articulate in communicating that, but they certainly have exposure to what's going on in the business. So how does that compare to someone who's got a HR background, who doesn't necessarily have a P&L, for example?
No, absolutely. So I think if I draw a comparison, you could be an HR professional that is focused on just the HR part of your job, or, for example, when you're heading a global HR team. For example, in one of my roles, I had 1,000 people in my team itself. So just managing the team budget, P&L was quite high. But equally, your role is to manage labor costs for the business. So you're constantly working with parts of the business to improve efficiencies and profitability. So you could either, view your HR job as policy implementation, or you could view it as a commercial business partner, and you could get involved in other things. And then if I look at myself, I've also added other skill sets like ESG, like AI, which therefore make me more desirable as a board member. I think increasing your skill set in different ways is also, it's important for everyone nowadays. It's not just
yes. I like that. I like actually what you're saying is widen your skill set by other things. And P&L, of course, would be very, very helpful. Well, it's been such a joy to have you, Devyani, and to speak to you. And before we wrap up today, as a woman who's achieved various leadership positions and board positions, what would be your message to other aspiring female talent listening to us today? I mean, I am supportive equally of male and female talent, so that is not the point, but it's always good to leave our female listeners, perhaps those who feel they may not always have the opportunity. What would be your message to them?
I think my key message is don't underestimate yourself. I think as females, we often tend to feel we have to absolutely know something before we go for it, for a new job. That's not necessarily true. So take some risk, be willing to just jump into things and learn as you go along. You may not have the surety, you may not have the certainty, but you're really capable of doing far, far more than you think you are. So trust yourself, trust the people around you, and seize opportunities, and you will find that things will just flow.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Thank you ever so much. And any message to everyone listening to us today, men and women, in terms of creating their own impact and legacy? 3 final quick life tips, perhaps.
Wow. I think be who you are. I think it's the more you are who you are and you do what you really enjoy, you will find that success just comes. So don't get constrained by society's expectations or people's expectations of what you should be doing. No job is too big or too small. So be who you are, do what you enjoy, and also always remember there is a bigger force that is always there to help you. So you're not alone.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, Devyani, thank you ever so much. It's been a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Rania. This time has really flown by, so it was really a good conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. And for anyone listening today, if this conversation resonated with you and you'd like to learn more about how I could support you and your team with advisory, mentoring, training, or to speak at one of your events, please get in touch. My contact details, as well as those of Devyani's, will be in the show note below. All right. And see you at the next episode of Impact Legacy with me, Rania. Thank you for tuning in to Impact Legacy with Rania. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe or follow so you never miss an episode, and click the bell to be notified of new releases. If this inspired you, please pass it on. Your likes, comments, and shares help us reach more people, because together we can grow this journey of influence, impact, and legacy.